White Christians need to learn, above all things, I think, to be good listeners. Over the last several years, as I've tried to help build a culture for racial reconciliation and kingdom diversity, which is a core value of Southeastern Seminary, I've come to understand more and more that my perspective is not the perspective of my African American brothers and sisters, or my Hispanic brothers and sisters, my Asian brothers and sisters. They really do see life differently. They're operating out of a different paradigm, a different context that's very different than mine. And I didn't really realize that until I stopped talking and began to listen. So I think one of the things that white evangelicals in particular have got to do is become better listeners. In addition to that, we've got to be willing to surrender power, which is, again, not indigenous to our nature. As I often say, not only do we need to invite ethnic minorities into our room and to have a seat at the table, we even need to be willing to surrender leadership at the table if we're really going to make progress and really help our brothers and sisters understand we see them on an equal plane with ourselves.
If you live in the middle of a place that is just overwhelmingly white, there's hardly any people of color where you live at all in your town. This sounds like a harsh thing to say, but you probably should not adopt a non-white kid. And this goes back to that form that everyone's going to have to fill out at some point if you want to adopt. And we've talked with other couples about this, given our experience. And, you know, if you're going to move to the middle of some place where it's all white folks and you're filling out this adoption checklist and it says, you know, what races are you open to? I think white folks struggle with guilt. They feel guilty, you know, if they say, well, I'm only going to check the box that says I'm open to adopting a white child. But it would be much better for your kids if you are going to only be able to, because of where you live, because of who your friends are, and because of what you can and can't change in your life. If you're going to raise kids like white kids, that's not bad. That's not wrong. That's not evil at all. But you should adopt white kids.
Dr. Cone, he opened my eyes to the fact that Christ is trying to restore brokenness, you know, and he really had a focus on that brokenness as manifesting as oppression, racially speaking. Dr. Cone really allowed me to see a new vista, a new space, a new avenue to allow the gospel to be made manifest. I think the evangelical will do well to hear the voice of Dr. Cone in drawing us towards the reality that the gospel, the resurrection of Christ, has implications for the here and now, but yet also making sure that we don't lose the eternal realities of the gospel.
An African American cannot thrive in a white evangelical space if that space is entrenched in white evangelical culture. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of time before I hit the brick wall. You know, mm-hmm. All my assimilation and everything, somebody's still going to call me the N-word somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
T'Challa's on top of a car fighting, and so is Okoye. Yeah. And they're just doing the same thing. And they're not like, neither one has to demean the other mm-hmm. in order to show that they're capable and strong. Yeah. It just resonates with me. I know that in America, historically in the world since Adam and Eve, men and women relationships have been broken from the jump. And in America, it's been seen in a patriarchal setup, and with the women's rights movement, all that having happened so we can have a voice. It's just really good to see what it could look like if a man and a woman, both equally powerful, equally skilled, really respect that in each other.
I mean, a lot of Christians, I think, suffer from hermeneutical solipsism. They assume that their interpretation is the only one that exists, or the only valid one. Yeah. But when you realize that there are insights you can get from different cultures, and even just from people in general, that their own life experience will bring something to the table. You do need to be prepared to accept that, you know, our way, you know, the Anglican way, the Presbyterian way, the male way, the white male way, Northern Hemisphere way, or whatever the way is you've been ingrained, is not the only way, and you can learn a lot and at least appreciate the people who are other, who are different to you. And that's in the global Church of Christ. That is what we should be doing.
Lynching still hovers over our culture.
There is an uncanny, exact correlation between the rate of capital punishment in North Carolina and the rate of lynching in North Carolina. We've got a president who cannot rule this country without vilifying brown people at the border.
I think a lot of white men, especially seminarians, have to die to the idea of being the pastor of a multi-ethnic church. And I once told a white friend of mine that that's the one thing in the United States of America that it probably was a good idea for him not to do. He began to weep and cry because he had never been told that there was something that he can't do in America.
Let me tell you some biblical stories, and let me just give it to you through an immigration lens. Have you read Daniel? Latinamente. This resonates. Because the life of an immigrant is the constant negotiation of loss. Loss of your language, loss of your food, loss of your friends, loss of your family, loss of your dignity, the loss of the nonverbal language, the warmth, the abrazos, the kisses on the cheek. Now you get sued for that in this country. What you begin to realize is that we need those other voices.
I think many Christians who are well-intended in their desire to uphold the authority of the text slip into a desire of protecting the text from misinterpretation, which they are trying to then read the Bible so objectively that they, because they cannot escape their own cultural trappings, assume their own cultural realities into this reality of inerrancy, and then we come up with this very simplistic reading of the text. Oftentimes, the pattern is for authors to come to publishers, but I think the publisher needs to have a missiological disposition to go in and finding these voices that are drastically underrepresented ideologically.
I can care about abortion. I do. I can speak up about abortion. I do. I can participate in anti-abortion things. I do. And that somehow doesn't seem to eat up and sort of push out concern I would have for something like mass incarceration, for example. If we want to use the sort of parlance of our day, I just think that's being consistently pro-life.
African readers of the Bible face the challenge that most of the models and methods of Bible interpretation or hermeneutics are rooted in a Western context. People sometimes speak of hermeneutics as if it has principles that are set in stone. But is hermeneutics static, or is it dynamic in the sense that it can change as methods of interpretation are adapted to different cultural contexts?
I think we do better when we sit down to read the Bible and we have brothers and sisters coming from all different ethnicities, all different socioeconomic standings, because they're going to have insights into this infallible, inerrant text that I, for example, will miss.
How many people believe that they're where they are simply because of hard work ethic and dedication? They don't think about it. It's the people who take growth hormones, right? It's the people who say, that didn't help me hit 70 home runs. Those little things, because they really can't calculate. Now, why won't they admit the reason why you did that is because of some substance that diminishes some of the credit you've been giving to yourself? Well, that's painful. And so I think that it's really just painful to realize that it's not all that I thought it was, that there was some outside things that just, again, diminish the credit I've been giving to myself. And then the guilt kicks in, I'm sure, at some times where people are like, well, you want me to apologize for what I can't change? And we're saying, no, just acknowledge what it is, because then that'll make you then take, when much is given, much is required. So the person who has much, give to him who doesn't have have. So now you start getting into this concept of redistribution and this. So, well, no, all we're saying is, Jesus even said, let him who has 2 tunics give the one who has none. I mean, this idea of taking from your abundance and making sure that there's no lack in the body. And I think there's the church body, and then there's the brotherhood of humanity. We need to empower a group to be in a leadership position to help our tendency. You see what I'm saying? What are the New Testament books? They're writings to help Gentiles to know that they're not second class.
What are the issues that you're seeing, or sort of the worldview that you're seeing emerging from younger evangelicals?
Well, I think that they do care about the issues, but I dare say that they actually have a more holistic approach to the issues. They're not partisan. So they are they tend to be pro-life, as you and I are, but they also tend to be concerned about race issues because that is a life issue. They are concerned about immigrants because that is a life issue. It's not related to abortion directly, but all of these things interconnect. So I think that they have a more holistic approach, and I think that they have a highly tuned radar for hypocrisy. Yeah. And that is one of the things that's being exposed within 21st century American evangelicalism. And they see through it, thank God. The Me Too, Church Too movement, which has shown many leaders willing to cover up abuse in order to, save the institution or save the reputation or save the powers that be. And that's just simply not acceptable. And so women are beginning to question that. And that also gives us some sort of partnership with minorities, because they too are victims of these power structures that put powers that be or the status quo before human life and dignity and safety. And so Trump just sort of crystallized all that. It seems like in God's providence that because of COVID, the protests and the attention has been prolonged on this George Floyd situation in a way that might not have happened without it. And so I do see that there is an awakening. My friends, my family members are all talking about not only George Floyd, but actually beginning to see things that they weren't seeing before.
There are people who are trying to get the attention of civil government and have their voice heard, because every other time they're not being heard. There's nobody clamoring for their vote. There's nobody doing town halls in their neighborhoods listening to them. So they're like, man, if they're not going to listen to us, then what we have to do is kind of get busy and throw a brick through a window. Any simple answer is a wrong answer, because this is very complex. And so if we understand King's quote, and I'm going to butcher this, but the language of the oppressed is the brick, or the right is the language of the oppressed, or however that goes. The unheard. The unheard. There you go. Then how can we leverage our own voice for the sake of those who don't have one?
The church can obviously listen. That's a very simple, we're listening, come talk with us. I think the church can do that. But then to also say, and we have healing hope. That can affirm what you see as wrong. We can biblically affirm that as wrong, and then point you to something that brings hope, no matter if these systemic things change or not, if the policies change, though we labor and fight for those things.
If you can help people to understand, I don't want to demonize and vilify them like they're just doing this for nothing. This is the time to admit it's not the biblical prescription for how to do anything. But it is understandable, again, or like you said, an understandable or to be expected response to people feeling trapped and not knowing how to get their point across. So now that's why the church, we have to turn up. We have to turn up by reflecting. We understand your pain. We see that this is coming from somewhere. Let's finally address it.
In terms of God's word, he's called every single one of us to one of two forms of faithfulness. We can be faithfully single, or we can be faithfully married based on God's definition of marriage. So luckily, I can actually fulfill either of those vocations, whether I'm attracted to men or women or both or neither, or potted plants. Like, my attractional patterns don't actually matter very much.
I don't minister out of rigid categories of gay and straight. I think those only contribute maybe to premature labeling. Like, if I'm not gay, then I'm straight. If I'm not straight, then I'm gay. Ooh, let's back off of that a little bit. Let's just talk about other ways to think about your identity and to describe your same-sex sexuality. I'm not setting this up as you got to make people choose in Christ or gay. I'm not doing that.
If it takes Latino Christians to drive us to a biblical understanding of immigration, then we should view this as a service to the church. God's people have historically been called immigrants, who are themselves to show compassion to the stranger. Israelites were required to treat foreigners with love and kindness, contrary to the way they were treated in Egypt. Exodus 22 and Deuteronomy 23 are a couple places for that reference. The law did not stipulate qualifications for such treatment, such as a green card or work visa.
Christianity and race in America were intertwined at its inception because Christianity was the thing used to be able to say, how can we enslave these people yet evangelize them? And so how is it that we can construct or imagine a faith that sets somebody's soul free but keeps their body belonging to us? Right. But the issue is that as that gospel was preached to slaves to keep them in check, the people who were propagating that gospel to them actually took it on themselves. And so now we have a gospel that's a half gospel that says, your soul can be free, but your body doesn't matter. Right. So then, the weighty matters of law, KJ, get relegated to, piety. Yeah. And so then justice gets cut out from the idea of dikaios, or the justice, righteousness, sort of two-parted reality of the gospel and what it does.
It's kind of like Resolution 9, which I know we'll get to in a moment. I think there are many, many good things in that resolution. It's not all bad.
There's some people who don't see one scintilla of positivity in CRT. I know that Dr. Akin has expressed that he can see, he's sympathetic to the fact that it raises sensitivities and it raises concerns and it raises questions and it posits theories that you say, that's good. I need to wrestle with that. I need to grapple with that. I know him.
I want our faculty and our students to be aware of critical race theory and what Deuce said a moment ago, where they raise really good questions, where they expose underlying hidden aspects of racism. I'm thankful for that. Again, as an overall framework and ideology, I think it comes up short. But that doesn't mean everything that they say is wrong. In a number of instances, it's very clear it overlaps with Revelation and what God's Word says about these issues. It just simply highlights them in our particular context and kind of, I can see how the Bible's talking about that right over here. So I do think that has been helpful. I want to be very clear. I believe that racism exists both on the personal level and the systemic or structural level. As I've said for a number of years now, sinful humans, by their very nature, are going to build sinful structures that benefit those in power.
I think what is probably important is for pastors and leaders to develop relationships with women of color, because that often feels really awkward. Like, it is really awkward for me to sit down with a professor who's white because I don't know what that relationships look like. The same way when people go through a lot of training to be missionaries, because they want to be able to engage people in a different cultural context. Yes. Unfortunately, because I'm an American, I think sometimes people forget that we are different culturally. And so it's just really awkward. And so I don't sit down with a lot of professors. I don't sit down with a lot of pastors or leaders because I don't think I'm the person who they immediately see, because I don't think that's the norm.
Why would we need an illustration in light of the current continued legacy of injustice that exists in our world? Isn't it fascinating, though? And it's interesting the way stories are crafted, because I wonder if we paid attention to this, not just because of media, but because we were dealing with a COVID-19 reality where breath and where, again, the respiratory system is challenged. And yet maybe we listened because we heard, again, George Floyd challenged with breath. And one can almost wonder, did it stick into the psyche of his brain, the words of Eric Garner? When Eric Garner said, "I can't breathe," are those the words that simply eked out as he was calling for his mother? These are difficult moments. To say the names of Brenna Taylor, Itea Jefferson, Rashard Brooks, Daniel Prude, and the list goes on and on. These are difficult moments for the Southern Baptist movement. Historically, when you are a slaveholder, historically, when you've not honored the Imago Dei, historically, when you've enforced and endorsed segregation, historically, when you haven't changed positions of power, here's the problem with that. Historically, when you align up with the nationalistic America rather than the gospel of Jesus Christ, the problem with that is simply this, that you misrepresent who Jesus is. I hope this is a generation that doesn't get distracted. See, I serve a Christ that I can talk correctly about the history and reality of who we are as black people and white people. I serve a Jesus to where we can talk correctly about the injustices that's been done to the black church. See, you gotta understand, I'm even dressed that way today because understand something. From the top up, I'm dressed for the conservatives. From the top up, I'm dressed for you. From the bottom down, I got on my jeans because I'm ready to do some work. And I got on my boots too. And I wear a bow tie as a reminder that I tied this myself. And by tying it myself, my neck will not hang from anybody's rope anymore because I'm afraid of what I might say, that there's a possibility of lynching because black men often had to say those things and their speech was relegated often. But my speech will not be relegated. I tied this myself this morning.
Some followers of Jesus feel more comfortable around this kind of person because of the color of his skin. They hire that person because he's from the same cultural background. Brothers and sisters, you need to make up your mind whether you're going to regard people according to the flesh or according to the Spirit. I want to ask you, how can the problem of racial division and inequity be solved in this country?